Good morning to everyone. I'm very, very pleased to have the opportunity to be at the Smart Transit Conference. I'm really sorry that you all can't be here in Boston. This is a great time of year. I would recommend next time when you're talking to the Smart Transit folks that March can be the heavy, wet snow season and maybe not always the most amazing time to see our city, but I'm really glad that we're getting the chance to meet virtually and to talk about the issues around the industry. So you can see there's my quick mistake. So let me introduce myself. My name is Rob DiAdamo. I'm the executive director of the MBTA Commuter Rail network. And we are the fifth largest commuter rail system in the country. We operate with approximately 500 pieces of revenue equipment, 90 locomotives in service every day, and 420 coaches. We operate throughout eastern Massachusetts. We go across the border down to Rhode Island. We operate over 500 trains a day that move approximately 140,000 people daily. And I will touch on, you can see on the last bullet, the impact of COVID, because the statistics I'm giving you are not necessarily the statistics of August of 2020, as you can imagine. But we do operate, again, throughout the region, going as far west as Worcester for us, and as into Providence. We do go, and we go basically the ring of approximately 60 miles around Boston. We also do run special trains to special events for Patriots games, for concerts. We run a special seasonal rail service down to Cape Cod. So it's a very, very robust network. As I noted, it's about 500 trains a day of ours. Importantly, we also interact with a lot of other railroads who are using our system. Amtrak is a very, very robust partner. We share the Northeast Corridor with them, so for their Acela service. But people may not know that they also run service up to Maine on the Downeaster on our tracks, and they run service west out, I think, eventually to Chicago on our tracks. And one thing I did forget to note that, unlike many other railroads, we do own almost everything in the service area. The tracks, the rolling stock, the stations are MBTA owned, which is wonderful because it does give us a certain level of control over the nature of the service that I think can be a challenge for some of the other railroads. So we are in I don't want to say unique position, but we're in a special position where we do own our assets. So importantly, in this next bullet, we are a division of the MBTA, right? We are part of a larger organization. I think in a lot of places, people are used to the commuter rail network being something separate, like a Metrolink out in California, New Jersey Transit. We are part of the larger MBTA network, and I think that really works very, very well for us because it gives us the ability to interact very closely with our other service partners. Sorry, I'm going to slip into slideshow. Excuse me, I didn't realize I had not done that. It gives us the ability to really work very carefully with our partners, especially in this era right now, in this COVID era, where we are trying to maximize service and keep trains and buses kind of as lightly impacted as possible. We want to give people as much spacing as we can on the different services. And so when we can work hand in glove with the bus team, if there are places where we can augment service or change fare structures to encourage people to maybe take a train who would have taken a bus, and it reduces crowding on a bus, I think that's a huge advantage for us. This next bullet, rail transformation. So one thing that we are doing right now is traditionally we have been very much a commuting system, right? Where we bring most of our riders in the morning, we take most of our riders home at night. Not everyone, but the vast majority. About 2 years ago, our board authorized a study to look into changing the nature of our service, where we could become more of a high-frequency, low-emission service running on greatly expanded headways, really in the inner core, about 10, 15 miles out of Boston, running at maybe every 15 minutes. So almost becoming another rapid transit arm of the entire public transportation network. And so right now we are at the very early stages of implementation of rail transformation. I will touch on that a little bit as we go forward. And I did mention COVID-19. Obviously, a lot of the things I'm talking about, or I would have talked to you about back in early March, have changed significantly. As Alan mentioned, these are incredibly difficult and challenging times. Our service is very comparable to most of the other rail networks that I talk to. We're running it somewhere around 10% of normal ridership. We're running about 85% of our normal service. And we're not exactly sure when that's going to come back. I mean, this is definitely, obviously for everyone, this is uncharted territory. And so we are in an instance where we are trying to plan for a future where we're also trying to realize that we have, really kind of ridership challenges for the near term, and the MBTA, and I think every transit agency will be seeing significant budget challenges over the next year or two, and how we sort of get through all those and keep the network that we want running is going to be a challenge, I think, for the whole industry. I think people are really going to need to weigh in and make sure that transit is properly protected as we go forward, because I think it'll obviously be a huge part of our future. So moving on, so technology for the railroad, and most of the facts I want to give you about the railroad weren't to shock and awe and say, look, we're really big. I think we're really just to give you some context of the complications of running with multiple partners on these lines, with so many trains, with so much FRA oversight, all in the name of safety. And so technology is an important piece of what we do, but we also want to make sure that we are sort of running the bread and butter service as well as we can. Some of the things that we are working on today, that I'm just going to touch on very briefly, is we are trying to significantly improve the customer information that we get out, and that's largely with much better signage throughout all of the key stations, real-time information about train availability, of hopefully eventually real-time information about how crowded certain coaches are or are not. And then something that's very exciting is, right now most of our payment is kind of the old-fashioned. You either flash a pass or someone comes by with a pair of paper cut, hole cutters, and goes to a ticket. And over time, we've really been trying to modernize the way we collect fares. And so right now, there's new ways to be paying on board with credit cards, which allows for us a much better fare capture, which is really important to us. But I think it's also much easier for the customer. We're also right now in the process of trying to install gates at our 3 biggest stations. About 90% of our customers will eventually go through Back Bay Station, North Station, and South Station. And so if we can install gates, that will give us an opportunity to make sure that everyone is paying their fare, or at least has a valid fare as they get on board. There'll still be steps with conductors, but it will free up conductors to do more passenger information, to do more safety specific to assist a passenger who may have a disability, maybe have a mobility challenge. So getting us to be able to automate the way we collect fares is a huge initiative for the railroad. And in terms of service, we have recently created a new emergency operations center. And interestingly, now in the COVID era, we now have virtual emergency operations centers that we've had to test out. So trying to prevent everyone from being in one space. And so we went from having this great new EOC to now having a virtual EOC, which has been a new level of challenge. And we do have a relatively new rail simulator, which allows people to keep up on their certifications, and mostly for engineers to keep up on certifications and to become qualified on different lines, not fully qualified, but get testing via a rail simulator. I wanted to touch on those issues. There's so many technology issues, and I'm sorry, and I do want to touch on again PTC and give a huge shout out to our PTC team, who just in the last 10 days, the MBTA is now fully PTC operational. I think that's a challenge that a lot of people did not think we had a chance of meeting a couple of years ago, and the PTC team deserves a ton of credit. And I mean, maybe during either question and answer or later on in the forum, we can talk more about PTC, which is a huge new safety improvement for the railroad. But what I wanted to focus on today, when I look at technology, the things that we are really focused on, the things that we know we need, are predictive tools that prevent challenges and improve the customer experience. There's a lot of great technology ideas out there, but if they're not really helping us improve the customer experience in some way, then they're great to have, and they may have some ancillary benefits, but we really want to make sure that we are that we are ultimately doing things that have a very, very strong customer focus. And you'll hear from our general manager later today, but improving the customer experience is 100% what we're about. And where we're looking most specifically is in the area of safety and reliability. And I want to touch on one initiative for each of those areas. Safety is the #1 priority at the T. That might sound like lip service. I can tell you that we have an operations call every morning, and we start with the safety department. And my boss, the deputy general manager, all Jeff Gonneville does is emphasize safety over service. Whenever there's any sort of question or any issue, it is not a platitude. It is the way we operate the system. 100% safety is the #1 priority. With that in mind, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we had a derailment that was caused by losing a wheel on a train. No one was seriously injured, but it could have been worse. And we were looking at ways that we could try to prevent that type of incident from happening again. Wayside detection is nothing new to the railroad. What is new to the railroad is a system that we have developed that allows us to use acoustics to basically, there are 4 locations throughout the railroad where we have the system set up where locomotives and coaches pass through. Each piece of rolling stock has kind of a signature, and what it's looking for is any sort of strange differential in the acoustic echo, I call it echo emission, I think people use different phrases, between the bearing and the wheel, because these are things that may not be readily observable through a normal inspection, but they are things that, using these acoustic systems, we can try to catch a very, very early on problem that may be due to some tolerance or some tension that's out of whack, and catch it much earlier. So as my chief railroad officer says, when 2 surfaces interface, there's a standard frequency given off. So when the sound is different, then a fault is raised, and we can have, either by text message or by email or whatever system we want, the system can let the mechanical folks know that coach 1621 or locomotive 1028 has a questionable emission profile, or sound emission profile, acoustic emission profile that needs to be checked. And we did use this recently to catch an incident in January. I don't think the coach was unsafe by any stretch, but we were able to catch very early on an issue that eventually could have led to a problem, right? And obviously, a derailment can be an incredibly serious issue. It can be a huge service disruption, and that's an inconvenience, but also creates a real safety risk that we would like to avoid at all costs. And so, having the system that we're using, this acoustic ability to measure these wheel and bearing interfaces, and seeing if for some reason there's any sort of issue with the tolerances, and catch them as early as possible, that it may just not be readily available to kind of the naked eye or a regular inspection, is a significant safety improvement for us. And this is something that we worked with our rail contractor, Keolis, to implement. And to everyone's credit, I think that we had 4 of these that were installed within the year. They were all in by last December, and they're in locations where we make sure that the train set is going to hit one of them on a regular basis, and we can keep track of how each piece of equipment can and should sound, and capture any issues before they become more problematic. So, using predictive tools to promote safety, and then reliability, right? I mean, the reality is that no one wants to be stranded during their commute. It really deters people from wanting to use the system, or sort of just puts a bad taste in people's mouths about their commute. And we've all had that experience, or we've all heard about the experiences with a locomotive or something that fails during service that involves train having to be rescued, or buses, or all the things that we desperately want to avoid, that really, really negatively impact someone's day. They've had a long day at work, they're trying to get home, and all of a sudden we don't deliver the level of service that we want to deliver. And so one of the questions is, how do we become a more reliable system? We do run, as I said, 90 locomotives. Approximately 50 of them are we call them politely the legacy fleet, but they're old, right? They are old diesel locomotives that we need to be upgrading and we need to be watching very carefully. They do run well, don't get me wrong, but they are still they're not brand spanking new locomotives that we feel we have 1,000% confidence in all the time. In the sense of that they don't need to be watched very carefully. We have confidence when they're on the road, but they just need to be watched. And so what we're doing now is we've significantly increased our oil analytics. And the way oil has been sort of described to me is it's almost like the blood of the rolling stock fleet. In the same way you'd be going to see your doctor or go see a healthcare professional, you may have blood work done beforehand that they would analyze, and that would give them a much better ability to treat you, to identify any sort of problems, maybe identify problems early. And that's what we're doing with oil analytics. We're using machine learning, we're using AI, where oil is being taken from fleet every 10 days and analyzed against its past patterns, against fleet past patterns, against any fleet problems. And we're able to then use that information because we always took oil samples, but realistically, the ability to quickly match up an oil sample against the entire 90 locomotive fleet and for all the code, et cetera, it was really probably not something that was going to be done rapidly in the same way that we can now with this analytic system. So now within minutes, we can have an oil sample analyzed, and it can give us real-time feedback about any issues with that locomotive that we want to tackle quickly. And where this is especially important is right now we have a $100 million program to overhaul 37 of our locomotives and really bring them up to a brand new standard, like a new standard. And the way it works is obviously we can't send 37 locomotives off the property at any one time because we need them for service. So what happens is as locomotives come back, we send locomotives into the program. Well, one of the big questions is always, how do you know exactly which locomotives to send into the program? And with the oil analytics, we can look up and decide how much time we realistically think a locomotive can continue to run in the way we want it to run. And if it's running very well and all the health checks are coming in really excellently, we can keep that locomotive in service. And if we have a locomotive that's showing any sort of issues, we may take that locomotive and say, hey, you're the next one in line to go be overhauled. And so, we have this massive program. Like I said, it's a $100 million program for 37 locomotives, but tied. And so I'll touch on a couple things that are really important to the commuter rail network going forward. Automatic passenger counters, we are in the process of installing them. I think we're going to get an incredible amount of data coming through. And I think one of the questions is, what will we do with all that data? I've seen that Long Island Railroad has in their app the ability to talk about specific coaches and the crowding on coach by coach, which would be a great tool to have now in the COVID era, and a great tool to have when we are back to the world where our coaches are legitimately crowded with passengers coming back into work, which I think will happen. So this is a huge initiative for us, and I'm very excited. It's also going to give us a lot of real-time data to have us better simply plan service and have a better sense of where our customers really do want to go. There's a lot more interzone travel that I think sometimes we always capture because we really think about the person who's commuting from the endpoint into the city of Boston. But if we can start getting better data about people who are making interim stops, it'll help us really improve the service levels that we're providing. Drones, we work very carefully with the Mass Aeronautics Commission. Back when I worked for the state in the early 2000s, the Mass Aeronautics Commission just simply oversaw all the small airports around Massachusetts. And I left for a number of years and come back. And since then, Mass Aeronautics has become experts in the world of drones. And I can really foresee a world where we're using drones to be doing inspections of the right-of-way, to be looking for sick trees. I point those two things out specifically. During a bad storm, and during a winter, we often have trees fall on the right-of-way. We try our hardest to keep up with them. but we can't capture everything, and even with inspections. And last year, we had a tree on the right of way for the first train out that really cut into a coach significantly. No one was injured. There were no passengers, I believe. It was still deadhead move going out. But and people had done all the right things, but of course, a tree had fallen on this gigantic property, and it was one that no one could have seen in the dark. So having drones or something like that out, able to look for obstacles, to be checking to make sure that our parking lots are properly plowed, or to check how full they are, I think will be in the future a huge incentive or a huge advantage for us. Fuel management, we are in the process of working with Keolis in developing a new system to better manage the level of fuel we use. We're a huge user of diesel fuel, which obviously has an emission profile. And so if we can more efficiently and effectively run the network, and either with shutdowns, with speed gauges, I think we all know our cars kind of use less fuel if they operate it absolutely optimally. And so if we can have some systems that allow engineers to run as optimally as possible, we will be able to minimize the amount of fuel that we do use, which has a huge environmental benefit and a huge cost benefit for us. I did note earlier, rail transformation. We are trying to move into becoming a low emission, high frequency service. This is one of our top priorities, and this is not a today or tomorrow initiative. This is a future of the MBTA initiative. But the question is, what is that going to look like? When I say low emission, we have a very interested advocacy group who says that just means getting onto the catenary, string up catenary, running electric. Does it mean batteries in the future? I don't know enough about hydrogen, and so we have recently gone out with a request for information to the industry just to ask what is out there, because we want to make sure that we are moving forward and we're not necessarily buying the tail end of yesterday's technology, but perhaps we're moving into tomorrow's technology. Of course, with the caveat that we don't want to be so cutting edge that we have a technology that we have a hard time maintaining or a hard time running on a reliable and systemic fashion. So this question about what the emission profile, what our fleet will look like in the next 5-10 years is a huge question for us. And I'll be very interested to hear from the industry about the future of batteries, the future of different types of power supplies. And that brings me to my last bullet, which is future challenges. And I guess the main challenge I just want to highlight for this group, kind of a sophisticated group, is that we do have many people come to us with many technology solutions, and I feel that every one of them it can be hugely beneficial to us. One of the problems we have is simply, how do we merge them all together, right? Having platform on top of platform, having things that don't talk to each other as well as they could, becomes a new burden for us. And so while it should be making us more efficient, or getting us to a point where we're able to kind of go through data more quickly, cull data, sometimes we end up with so many different ideas being thrown at us that eventually becomes almost, I don't want to say counterproductive, but not as productive as it could be. And so I think one of the challenges we have, and a challenge I throw out to everyone, is how do we get to a point where for the end user, this becomes as seamless as possible, that we're not trying to bring on a new system to look at X, Y, and Z, but we have systems that can all sort of integrate with each other and speak, and not seamlessly, but as well as possibly. I believe there'll be opportunities for follow-up, but I do want to put my email on here, so if anyone has any questions, it is simply rdiadamo@mbta.com. I'll be available through the different platforms on during the conference, but if anyone wants to follow up offline, that is my email. And it was a pleasure speaking to you in this fashion. It's definitely different, but I hope this was informative, and I hope to hear your questions either now or at the panel session later on.